Hey, it's Soul with another video. Today I'm going to talk about the future of WoW in the Battle for Azeroth expansion and try to get some discussion going about how the metagame of forming your party or raid team will change. Recently, Blizzard released a developer water cooler that goes over a few of the high-level approaches and design philosophies that they will use in the next expansion. It doesn't go into great detail, but I'll be covering one specific piece of this pretty complicated puzzle. Let's kick it off with a familiar quote. Bring the player, not the class. Once upon a time, in the days of the Burning Crusade, the people over at Blizzard realized they had to address a growing problem. It became a bit too important to bring certain classes thanks to the buffs and debuffs and other advantages that they brought to a raid. It was pretty extreme back then with stacking the soul stones and stacking the bloodlusts. And if you didn't have that certain thing the team needed, you're out. Even if you knew that Bob the Shaman sucked, he still contributed more raid throughput than you could so long as he pressed that one button and you hated him. Or her. That sort of thing. So during the Wrath of the Lich King expansion, arguably the greatest of them all, the great homogenization of abilities began to take hold to suit this new approach of bringing a player for their skill and not just the class buffs that were unique to them. It took some time, but if you wanted a battle resurrection, then you had options. No bloodlust? Hey, how about a time warp instead? Or whatever that thing is that hunters bring. The unique things that classes could bring to the table were becoming less unique. And eventually there were less of these abilities altogether. Times changed. Whatever happened to armor debuffs and magic vulnerability, stats and stam and pally power? By the time of World of Warcraft Legion, the old metagame of raid comp was all but gone. There's no expose armor or curse of the elements, replenishment isn't a thing because MP5 isn't a thing. Instead, these special group buffs now just benefited the individual player to increase throughput. Certain abilities like Devotion Aura were turned into personal cooldowns to support their team, and again, there were similar abilities shared between classes. In a group setting, the idea behind buffs and debuffs disappearing was that if it was already assumed that you had to have all these buffs, why even bother with the meta? There was an innocence, and I guess an ignorance to that. Bring the player, not the class. A player ought to be valued for the skill and experience they bring to the team and not just the buff that they're missing. But over time, and maybe predictably depending on who you ask, sacrifices were made. Class identity didn't have that same oomph despite the efforts made during the Legion expansion. There were a few holdouts like Death Grip, but things just haven't been the same. The pendulum swung a bit too far for the sake of fairness, and for some it sacrificed fun. In World of Warcraft's next expansion, Battle for Azeroth, the pendulum's about to shift yet again. One example from the water cooler mentions that the availability of certain utility skills, like AoE stuns, had become a bit too common, and the high-level approach is to get players to think about when is the best time to use them, and not how do we time everyone's AoE stuns so that there isn't an overlap. But I'm not going to get into that here. As a quick reminder, the information that I'm using is based on limited exposure to a single demo that was available during BlizzCon 2017. What you see here could look very, very different as more information is revealed in the coming months. In Biffa, classes appear to have unique buffs that they bring to their party or to their raid. This includes the following. Death Knights will bring Leech. Demon Hunters, Haste. Druids will bring versatility. Hunters will grant movement speed. Mages will increase intelligence. Monks give mastery. Paladins give armor. Priests bring stamina, rogues increase physical damage, warlocks increase magic damage, warriors bring strength and agility. The only buff missing from a class as far as we know are shaman, but that's likely to be like crit. Alone, this is a huge addition to the game, and we can expect more as we get closer to the expansion's launch. But let's take a look at the immediate implications. Obviously, it's going to mean that in order to have a perfect raid comp, especially for competitive mythic raiding, you'll want pretty much every buff. Regardless of what the numerical values are, not all buffs are created equal. Some are much more mandatory than others, but since these values aren't anywhere near finalized, I'm not going to get into the nuance of speculating. Anyway, this will, to some extent, bring back the very hard requirements that used to exist in groups. It possibly brings back the idea of benching members purely because Bob's buff might bring more than you, the skilled player, could. And maybe that's starting to look okay for Blizzard. It was said as much in previous BlizzCons, and I'm paraphrasing, but if there's going to be a push for class identities and helping players' contributions feel more special than simply their performance, this is a way to go about it, if not the way to go about it. Maybe at this point it's no longer okay to be so strict on this whole bring the player not the class idea. So with regards to raid comp, what will group leaders need to consider going forward in Battle for Azeroth? Some considerations are more extreme than others, but I'll be listing as many as I can think of for the sake of discussion, so just work with me here, okay? There's what I've been bantering about, class buffs, and that's going to have a big overall effect on performance. Flexible raiding will mitigate class buffs to a certain extent because you can just, pile people on. But this is limited until you hit up to 30 players up to Heroic, and of course, this is not going to apply for Mythic raiding. And then there's the encounters themselves, which could ask for a bit of curating with what wiggle room you have left. Maybe you need more soaks, more immunities, ranged versus melee, and that sort of thing. But performance isn't the only thing that motivates players to build groups a certain way. Loot is loot. And it's another thing some group leaders consider when recruiting for their guild, their team, or for today's pug. First, there's whether you'll go with personal loot or not, which is a really big thing to consider if you're thinking only of drops and have a very imbalanced team. Personal loot resolves many of the other factors in this list, but it affects the ability to trade these items. There's armor type, as in, having an all-druid team will limit your available drops, which would make you consider going for a personal loot system. The same might go for weapon type, since we'll likely be getting weapon drops again. By the way, are you excited about weapon drops again? Maybe? Okay. Thankfully, tier tokens will no longer be a worry with they being removed from future raids. No longer do you need to care so much about having too many classes rolling on protector tokens, and then during the run itself, only conqueror tokens drop. Okay, well that's good for me, but you get the picture. So some stuff hasn't changed. Personal loot changes things a lot if that system is something you or your team cares for. But those are considerations for loot after the boss is killed. Class buffs are going to matter at varying degrees, from the friends and family guild, to the pug, to the serious raid team, to the world stage. And to make things even murkier, there's also high-level keystone dungeons. What's the best comp going to be now? So here's a bit of speculation on my part. Personally, as someone part of the friends and family side, this could have a really big impact for my group. We're not a huge team, so it's unlikely we'll nail every class buff unless I grow my team, or I lightly nudge people to maybe have an open mind about trying a different class, Meanwhile, the pug world might get a little bit more challenging. It's all but guaranteed that group leaders will want one of every class for the sake of buffs, and that's on top of having, ahead of the curve, a ridiculously high item level, whatever the flavor of the month spec is at the time, and maybe certain gear is on reserve, I don't know. For the serious teams though, it's serious business. There's bound to be complaints about this system, but for the most hardcore, I think that they might appreciate a return to the meta because at that level it's assumed that their members can adapt for every situation and the game will be slightly less simple. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the subject, so share them in a comment below, including maybe your level of play, whether you're hardcore, casual, a raider, or a dungeoneer. If this video was informative or at the least enjoyable, please like and share it with friends. Subscribe for more of this and all things World of Warcraft, and I will see you in the next video. Until then, stay safe, stay happy, and stay breezy.